The desert had a way of testing souls. The wind came like whispers from the graves of men who had once believed they could tame this land, and now only their bones remained beneath the shifting dust. Along the cracked trail that cut through the high plains, a woman rode alone, her black shawl whipping in the dry wind, her eyes hollow but unbroken. Her name was Clara Duval, and she had been a widow for 3 months and 2 days. In the frontier, time was not counted by calendars, but by the number of sunsets a heart could survive. Her horse stumbled as she neared the edge of the canyon, its hooves kicking up red dust that settled like sorrow over her dress. She had eaten nothing since dawn. Behind her, the sun sank low, bleeding orange across a sky that looked like fire. She was running. From what? She wasn't sure anymore. Maybe from the grave she had dug herself. Maybe from the silence that came after every scream in her dreams. Her husband, Thomas Duval, had died in her arms the night outlaws burned their homestead. His blood had dried on her hands long before she could wash it away. When the last light slipped behind the mesa, Clara saw smoke in the distance, a campfire. She hesitated, her instincts telling her to turn back. But hunger and exhaustion won the argument. She rode closer, her heart pounding. The faint laughter of children reached her first. Then a man's voice, low, steady, commanding. He was a cowboy by the sound of it, the kind who could stare down a storm without blinking. As she entered the small camp, 2 children looked up from their stew pot. A boy and a girl, twins, about 6 years old, with bright eyes that carried both mischief and innocence. The girl dropped her wooden spoon. "Daddy, someone's here," she said, pointing at Clara with delight instead of fear. The man turned, rising from the log where he sat sharpening his knife. He was tall, built from years of hard riding, his beard trimmed but rough. His name was Ethan Cole, a rancher-turned-drifter whose legend had begun in gunfights and ended in silence. He studied the woman for a long moment. "You're a long way from town," he said, voice low as thunder rolling over open land. "My horse needed rest," Clara answered, though both knew that was only half the truth. He motioned for her to sit. "Stew's hot. You're welcome to it." His tone carried neither invitation nor suspicion, just plain decency, rare as rain. The twins scooted aside eagerly, offering her a spot by the fire. "You can have my biscuit," said the boy proudly. "It's a little burnt, but Daddy says that's how real cowboys eat." The girl giggled, her small boots dangling over the log. "What's your name, miss?" she asked. "Clara," she said softly, smiling for the first time in weeks. "That's a pretty name," the child replied. "I'm May, and this is Luke. We don't meet many ladies out here. Daddy says they're all smart enough to stay away from trouble." Ethan frowned slightly, but the corner of his mouth twitched, almost a smile. As the fire crackled, Clara ate slowly, letting the warmth return to her hands. Ethan asked no questions, and she offered no explanations. But in that silence, something fragile took shape. A sense of peace, perhaps, or a memory of what peace once felt like. When the twins fell asleep beneath their blankets, Ethan poured her a small cup of coffee. "Where you headed?" he asked. "Wherever the wind stops," she replied. "Ain't stopped yet," he said quietly. She nodded, staring into the fire. "I used to think the land was cruel," she murmured. "Now I think it's honest. It doesn't pretend to love you back." Ethan looked at her then, really looked. He saw the haunted eyes of someone who had lost everything but refused to die. He recognized that look because he wore it himself once. "You can rest here tonight," he said finally. "No harm will come to you." For the first time in months, she believed it. Later, as the stars filled the sky like silver dust scattered by God's own hand, she lay awake, listening to the soft breathing of the twins and the rhythmic crackle of the dying fire. The desert was quiet, but her heart was not. She remembered her husband's last words, "Don't let them take your soul." She had kept that promise, though the price was heavy. Just before dawn, she felt a small hand tug her sleeve. It was May, half asleep, her hair tangled like prairie grass. "Miss Clara," she whispered, "will you stay with us? Daddy smiles when you're here. He never smiles." Clara's breath caught in her throat. She brushed the girl's hair back gently. "Sleep, little one. We'll see what tomorrow brings." As she looked across the fire, Ethan was awake, his eyes meeting hers through the smoke. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. The frontier had its own language. Silence, glances, the steady beat of two wounded hearts still learning how to live. Far off, the coyotes howled, a reminder that danger never slept, and peace was always borrowed time. But for this one night, amid the dust and stars, the widow and the cowboy shared something stronger than fear, a flicker of belonging, born in the ashes of loss. The sun rose slow over the horizon, painting the sky in pale gold and blood orange. It touched the rough hills, the twisted sagebrush, and the lonely camp where four souls were learning what it meant to belong again. For a fleeting morning, it felt like the land itself had softened. The twins ran through the grass, chasing one another, while Clara hung a pot of coffee above the fire. Ethan saddled his horse, his quiet strength a comfort she had begun to depend on. She told herself she would ride away that morning, leave before the warmth turned to weakness. But when May handed her a wildflower and said, "It's for you, Miss Clara. Daddy says you make the morning look prettier," something inside her broke. She smiled, but her eyes shimmered with tears she didn't want anyone to see. Ethan noticed he didn't speak, but his silence carried a kind of understanding that words could. The frontier was cruel to dreamers, but sometimes, for a few breaths, it allowed them to live in hope. By noon, Ethan rode toward town to trade supplies, leaving Clara and the twins at the camp. "Keep the rifle close," he told her. "Coyotes ain't the only things that prowl this land." She nodded, fingers brushing the stock of the old Winchester he'd left beside the tent. The day was quiet until the sound of hooves came from the south, not one horse. Dust rose in the distance like smoke from an old wound. Clara's heart sank as she recognized the man leading the riders. Jed Malvern, the same outlaw who had killed her husband and burned her home. His scar was still there, running down the side of his face like a brand from hell. "Well, if it ain't the preacher's widow," Jed sneered as he pulled his horse to a stop, boots hitting the dirt with a heavy thud. "You thought you could run forever?" Clara reached for the rifle, but two of his men dismounted fast, grabbing her arms. She struggled fiercely, dust flying as her boots dragged across the ground. "Let her go!" Luke shouted, throwing a rock that struck one outlaw square in the chest. Jed turned toward the twins and grinned, cruel and cold. "Sweet kids. Maybe we take them too, teach them some manners." "Don't you touch them!" Clara cried, thrashing against the men's grip. Her voice cracked through the dry air like a whip. "You already took everything I had." Jed laughed. "Not quite everything, sweetheart." He leaned close, his breath reeking of whiskey. "You still got breath left, and I plan to take that too." Then in the distance came the sound that turned men's blood to ice, a single rifle shot, echoing across the plain. One of Jed's men dropped instantly, a red bloom spreading across his chest. The others turned, scanning the ridge, panic flaring in their eyes. Through the haze of dust, Ethan Cole appeared on horseback, riding like a storm, born from the earth itself. His hat was low, his rifle steady, and his face cold as stone. He didn't shout, didn't warn, just fired again. Another outlaw fell. The rest scattered, diving for cover. Clara used the chaos to elbow one of her captors and grabbed the rifle. The butt of the gun cracked against the other man's jaw, sending him sprawling. She spun, aimed, and pulled the trigger. The recoil bit into her shoulder, but the shot was true. The man dropped. Ethan thundered into the camp, leaping from his horse before it stopped moving. "Get the kids!" Ethan shouted, diving behind the wagon as bullets sliced through the air. The twins screamed, running for cover behind Clara, who crouched low, clutching the rifle tight. The air filled with dust and gunfire, the thunder of hooves, the smell of gunpowder biting through the dry wind. Ethan fired again, each shot precise, each movement calculated like a man who'd faced death too many times to flinch. Jed Malvern, bleeding from a graze along his arm, crouched behind a fallen log. "You ain't riding away this time, Cole," he bellowed. "You can't protect her forever." Ethan's voice came back cold and steady, echoing across the dust. Ain't trying to protect her. Malvern, just trying to end what you started. Clara, trembling but resolute, reloaded the rifle with shaking hands. He killed my husband, she whispered, almost to herself. Ethan met her eyes, and in that instant, they understood each other without words. This wasn't just about vengeance anymore. It was about reclaiming what the frontier had stolen from them both. The next shot came from Clara. It cracked the silence clean through the heart of the canyon. Jed's hat flew off, dust bursting around him as the bullet tore through his shoulder. He staggered, cursing, and reached for his revolver. But Ethan was already on him. The cowboy moved like a storm, boots pounding the dirt, revolver raised. Jed fired first. The bullet grazed Ethan's side, drawing blood. But Ethan didn't stop. He slammed into Jed, both men hitting the ground hard. The struggle was brutal. Desperate, fists dust pain, and rage tangled together. Jed's knife flashed in the sunlight. Ethan caught his wrist, twisting until the blade clattered into the dirt. Then came the final shot, one echo that silenced everything. For a long moment there was only the wind. Jed Malvern lay still, eyes open but seeing nothing. Ethan stood slowly, breathing heavy, blood seeping through his shirt. Clara dropped the rifle and ran to him. "You're hurt!" she cried, pressing a hand to his side. He managed a faint smile. "Just a scratch. I've had worse arguments with my horse." The twins came running, faces streaked with tears and dust. Luke hugged Ethan's leg tight, while May clung to Clara's dress. Daddy, is it over?" she whispered. Ethan nodded, looking toward the ridge where the sun began to sink again. "Yes, sweetheart, it's over." As they gathered by the campfire that evening, the world seemed quieter, like even the desert respected their peace. Clara cleaned Ethan's wound while the twins fetched water, arguing about who would be the better nurse. Ethan winced but smiled. "You're tougher than you look," he said to Clara. She gave a faint laugh. "Maybe this land teaches you to be." For a moment, neither spoke. Then May crawled into Clara's lap, eyes wide and hopeful. "Miss Clara," she said softly, "you're not going to leave, are you?" Clara hesitated. The wind tugged at her hair, the smell of smoke still hanging in the air. "I don't know," she murmured. Luke looked up, grinning. "If you stay, we'll ask Daddy to marry you." Ethan choked on his coffee, blinking at his children. "Now hold on," he began, but Clara was already laughing. A sound so pure and warm, it made the twins giggle too. For the first time in years, Ethan joined in, his rough laughter echoing against the fading light. When the stars came out, Clara leaned back against the wagon, watching the fire burn low. The twins had fallen asleep, their small hands still holding hers. Ethan sat beside her, his hat tilted forward, voice quiet as the night. "I ain't much good at talking about feelings," he said, "but if you stay, you won't have to run no more." Clara turned toward him, her eyes glistening. "Maybe I've been running to get here," she said softly. He reached out, taking her hand, rough fingers, gentle touch. The wind swept through the grass, carrying away the last of the blood and sorrow. For the first time, the land didn't feel cruel. It felt alive, forgiving, almost kind. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. Not in mourning, but as if singing them into tomorrow. The widow, the cowboy, and two little hearts that had seen too much too soon, now bound together by dust, fire, and love. And as dawn broke over the plains, Ethan whispered the words he never thought he'd say again. "Welcome home." If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because every story of love, loss, and courage deserves to live again in the dust of the American frontier.